Masechet Ketubot Daf Mem He. The topic today is going to be comparing two cases that are back-to-back in the Torah, the case of Mosi Shem Ra and the case of Na'ara HaMe'odasa. So we already know about Mosi Shem Ra. If the man accuses his bride of having cheated on him after the Kiddushin, before the Nisu'in, while she is a Na'ara and a Betula, if all those requirements are fulfilled, then there's a special law of Sikila in front of her father's house. Okay, those are Pesukim here, 20 and 21. Pasuk 22 is talking about standard adultery for an adult, which is Chenek. It doesn't say Chenek, but so without saying anything, we assume it's Chenek and not Sikila. Okay, so that's important to know that a default for adultery is Heinik. But the next one is what we're going to deal with today. A woman is engaged to a man and she is a betula, and then someone finds her in the city and lies with her. So since it's in the city, we're assuming that it was consensual on her part. Not true if it's basadeh, where we assume that she was raped. If she was raped, then she gets no punishment. But if she consented to it, then she does get punished. Then both he and her are taken to the gate of the city, so different from the previous law where it's the gate of the father's house. Here it's the city, and they are stoned. If it was in the city and she objected, she should have screamed out, and then someone would have saved her. And the man, because he committed adultery with someone else's wife. They're not married yet, but arusa is already sufficient to be called a wife for this law of adultery. Okay, so the difference between this and Mosi Shem Ra is that here she is found by witnesses, right? Witnesses must have seen that they committed this act, and it's not the husband who is accusing her based on the lack of betulim. So therefore, this here, both of them get sikila. So that's what they have in common, although here it's the gate of the city. And the previous one is where the husband claims, hey, there was no betulim here. And if that's true, what he said, then also sikila at the father's house. All right. So now we're about to see our two baraitot. Here's the quick outline of the sugya that we're going to see. We're going to see one baraita, which is going to mention this law of na'ara me'odasa. And it's going to say that, this law of sikila applies only if she's punished while she's a na'ara. Once she grows up and becomes a bogeret, then she gets the regular punishment of an adult, which is hayanik. Now that's, okay, so that's baraita 1. Then we're going to see another baraita that talks about the slander, Mosi Shem Ra, where whether it's Na'ara or Bogeret, it's both Sikila. Well, see, the Mosi Shem Ra, okay, so that's going to be a question. How come Na'ara Morasa, if she gets the punishment when she's grown, it's chenek, but for the case of slander, if she grows up, then it's still Sikila, no matter what. All right, so that's going to be the challenge. We're going to have 3 answers to it. So let's begin. Taneh Shela. Shela, this is the first baraita. We could refer to it as Shela's baraita. Says Shalosh midot bena'ara. A na'ara who goes astray can be judged in 3 different ways depending on the particulars. Ba'ula aidim bebet hamiha shezinta bebet abiha. If witnesses came while she was in her father-in-law's house. Meaning she's already married, because when you do Kiddushin, she stays at her father's house, and then once Nisu'in happens, Nisu'in by definition is that the groom brings her from her house to his house, to his father's house. They would live in the little clans, and that's the standard, that the man stays in his house and the woman moves to his house. So if the witnesses come and say that while she is in her father's house, her father-in-law's house. She's already married. Shezinta bebet abiha, and says that before the marriage she had committed adultery when she was when she had kiddushin. Solkin ota al petach bet aviha kilomar ugidulim shegidartem. In that case, we stone her at the entrance of her father's house to say, look, with this kind of daughter that you brought up. So she would get sikila. That first case is an application of Mosi Shemra, even though it's witnesses that came and not the husband himself who's claiming, hey, there's no betulim. It's equivalent in the sense that she is a na'ara the whole time, and she is accused after the marriage rather than before. The second case is the regular na'ara ma'orasa case. Ba'oda edim bebet aviha shezinta bebet aviha. So now witnesses come while she's in her father's house. In other words, before Nisu'in, after Kiddushin. So she's in her father's house, and witnesses come before she gets married and say, hey, you committed adultery. In that case, soklin ota al petach shahad ha'ir. That is the second law in Devarim that we saw. And here are the Pesukim once again, that Nara betula me'orasa li'ish, and someone finds them in the city, and so that sikila is going to be at the gate of the city. Okay, so that's two cases. The first one, again, is the Mosi Shemra case, where the witnesses or his accusation happened after the marriage, and the second case is when the witnesses come before the marriage. Okay, and that's both sikila, but the difference is where. The third midah is sarcha ulbasof bagra tidon bechayanek. If she went astray and committed adultery when she was a na'ara during nisu'in, during kiddushin, but she became an adult. She passed her 12th and a half birthday. In the meantime, and she's sentenced after that. In that case, she is treated like an adult, regular adult, who commits adultery, gets chanek. So in other words, the first two cases are when she sins as a na'ara and she's sentenced as a na'ara. Then she gets sikila. But if she's sentenced as a bogeret, then the law is chanek. All right, that is Shela's first baraita. We ask, Lememra de kol hechad ishtane migufa. Ishtane ketala. So now, according to you, this Shela, you're saying that anytime her body changes, meaning that she becomes an adult, goes from 12 and a half and above, so then her death penalty also will change. If he's na'ara, sikila. If she's a bogeret, she gets hanek. That's what we just said. Urminhi, but we have a challenge from a second baraita. Na'ara me'orasa shezinneta. Umishe begra hosi aleha shemra. If she was a na'ara, me'orasa, it has to be a na'ara, me'orasa and betula, in order for the whole law of Mosi Shemra to apply. So here regarding Mosi Shemra, if the sin happened while she was a na'ara, but the marriage did not happen until she became an adult, and so they consummate the marriage, and she is a bogeret, he's Mosi Shemra, hu eno lokeh ve'eno noten me'asera, he v'zomeh makdimin lebeta sekila. So, because now she's an adult, so the law of Mosi Shemra does not apply to him. We'll see why. He does not get the usual lashes that he would get if he falsely accuses her, and the 100 selah that he would have to pay if he falsely accuses her. But nevertheless, she gets sikila, even though she is now an adult, meaning that it doesn't matter that she became an adult. We still apply the punishment because she sinned when she was a na'ara. We had here another, parenthetically, zomemeha. If there are witnesses that turn out to be edim zomemin, and they say, oh, we know that she committed adultery while she was a na'ara, if they're found to be edim zomemin, they get the same punishment that she would have gotten, which is also sikila. So literally it reads, she and the edim zomemin both get sikila. We clarify this. Both of them get sikila. one or the other. Either if once we find them to be Edim Zoamin, we know they're lying. They get killed. She wouldn't get killed. And if she already got killed, then we don't apply the law of Edim Zoamim anymore. So only one or the other. Yeah, that's what I mean. Ela ohi ozomeha makdimin lebeta sikila. One or the other gets sikila. So that is our question here. Let's look at the chart. Baraita number 1, which is talking about Nara me'orasa. And actually the first baraita is talking about both. The first clause is Mosi Shemra, second clause is Nara me'orasa. But then the third clause says, in either case, when she is a Na'ara, yeah, she gets Sekila. But when she's a Bogeret, she gets Hanik, right? If the sentencing happens at the time of Bogeret, or the accusation happens. When she's a Bogeret, she gets Hanik. Baraita 2 says that when that's talking about a case of slander, says Na'ara, she gets Sekila. But if she's a Bogeret, she also gets Sekila. Just that his punishment is different. So now how are we going to deal with this contradiction? What's the law? Does becoming a Bogeret change? Right? Changing her body is the language that we used. Does that change the outcome of her punishment or not? All right, so we're going to see now 3 answers. Let's just look at what they are. Rava is going to say that Mosi Shemra is a chidush, and it's different from the norm. So we have to distinguish here between those 2 laws. Okay, so let's see how he applies that. Amar Rava, Mosi Shemra ka'amart, shane Mosi Shemra de chidushu. The second baraita that you're questioning from is about Mosi Shemra. You bring from that, Mosi Shemra is different than usual. Usual, someone who's a Bogeret will get Hanik. But Mosi Shemra is different kind of by definition, because Mosi Shemra necessarily, the accusation is going to happen after she gets married. Now going from Nisu'ah, from Mikudeshet to Nisu'ah is also a fundamental change in her legal status. And even though now she is Nisu'ah, she left her father's house, and that is in a way becoming an adult. So it's kind of equivalent to becoming a Bogeret by age. And yet, built into Mosi Shemra is the law of Sekila. So therefore, just like after she's married, she gets Sekila, so too, after she becomes a Bogeret, she gets Sekila for Mosi Shemra. That's the difference. And so therefore, the second baraita is talking about Mosi Shemra. The first one was talking about Na'ara me'orasa. So now here's the proof that Mosi Shemra is fundamentally different. In the case of Na'ara me'orasa, not Mosi Shemra, if she enters the marriage canopy and she did not yet consummate the marriage with her husband, Vizinta, and she commits adultery, she gets Hanik, even though, in other words, because now she's married. In other words, the change in marital status has an effect on a Na'ara me'orasa. And therefore, you see Na'ara me'orasa, any change in her status, whether it's an age change or a marital status change, will remove her from Sikilav Na'ara me'orasa into the chenek of a regular adulterer. Veilu Mosi Shemra biskila, but Mosi Shemra, the marital status change does not change the punishment. She's now married, but doesn't matter. She still gets Sekila. So too, even though she becomes a Bogeret, also, if it's a Mosi Shemra case, she would also get Sekila. So that's Rava's argument. Fundamentally different. Amar le, rather, Mosi Shemra is exceptional. Amar le Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua le Rava. So Rav Huna, the son of Yoshua, objects and says, "Dimach chadid rachamana hechad elai ishtane gufa, aval echad ishtane gufa la chadid rachamana." He says, you didn't really argue anything, Rava. Maybe you're right. Mosi Shemra is a chidush, but maybe the chidush is only when she has a legal status change. She goes from arusa to nisu'ah. That's the chidush, even though she is now nisu'ah. And usually, in the case of Na'ara me'orasa, case that once she becomes an adult, once she becomes married, yeah, that changes, goes from sikila to chenek. The chidush of Mosi Shemra is regarding a legal status change. Even though she's married now, she still gets sekila. But who said that that also means that the Torah went as so far to make an extra chidush, that a change in her body, meaning a change in her age, passing her 12 and a half mark, going from Na'ara to Bogeret, who says that also would not change the outcome, right? Maybe that's no different. It's not exceptional in that case. So your proof is really not a proof, and really, conceptually, they should be the same law. Na'ara Morasa and Mosi Shemra should have the same law. So back to the question. Ela Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So now we're going to have a second answer. The second response is going to be that it's actually a machloket between two Tanaim. These two Baraitot, Baraita 1, Baraita 2, are by different set of Tanaim each. And so here we have the machloket that they are arguing about. Ditnan. Whether a change in status or changes one's legal outcome or not is subject to a machloket between two Tanaim and a Mishnah in Masechet Horayot. That's talking about a Kohen Gadol or a king who sins. Now, we know that a Kohen Gadol or a king who sins brings a different korban than a commoner who sins. But now the question is, what if the sin, that's only if the sin happened after they became a king or became Kohen Gadol. Then they bring the special korban. What if they sinned before they became a king, but only now are bringing the korban after? What do they bring? Hateu ad shelo nitma'u. They sinned before they became appointed to, let's say, Kohen Gadol. V'nitmanu, and then they became appointed after. Harehen kehedyot. Tanna Kama says they bring the regular sin offering that they would have brought before, which is a female sheep or goat. That's the commoner, and not the bull that a Kohen Gadol would usually bring. Okay, right. So, in other words, it goes by the time of the sin, not by the time that they bring it. In other words, a change in status does not change the legal outcome. So, Tanna Kama here would be the same as the second baraita that says Na'ara or Bogeret, they get Sekila no matter what, because a change in legal status here, change in age, does not change the outcome, just like for Kohen Gadol, the change in legal status does not change their korban. They still bring the same korban as they would have before. We go by the time of the sin. Whereas Rabbi Shimon disagrees with Tanna Kama and says, Im noda lehem ad shelo nitmanu hayavim, misha nitmanu peturim. He says depends on the knowledge. When did they become aware that they had sinned? If they became aware before so they sinned and became aware that they sinned before he was appointed to become Kohen Gadol, then he has to bring one like a commoner. But mishenitmanu, but if he sinned, then he became Kohen Gadol, and then he realized that he sinned, he became aware of it, then peturim, he does not bring the chatat of an offering, the chatat offering of a commoner. So we see, according to him, that a status change does change the outcome, and therefore he would be the author. He would agree with Shelah, the author of the first baraita, that a legal change from Na'ara to Bogeret does change the status, just like this Kohen Gadol. Now he became Kohen Gadol, he no longer brings the korban of a commoner. So that's Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's answer. That the baraitot have a machloket. They're two different opinions that we can identify. But then we reject this because Emud Shaminan le Rabbi Shimon de'azil af batar yedi'ah de'azil batar yedi'ah ve'lo azil batar chata'ah mi shema'at le. We only know from this Mishnah that Rabbi Shimon requires also awareness. In order to be liable to a korban as a commoner, he has to have done the sin and be aware of the sin before he becomes Kohen Gadol. Then when he's bringing it, he brings it as he did before. So really, the status change does not change anything. Does he say that we follow only the knowledge, only the time that he's aware? Well, see, if he was saying that, then if he sinned before, became Kohen Gadol, then became aware after, he should have to bring a pod like a Kohen Gadol brings. But that's not what it says. If the sin was before and the awareness of the sin was after became Gadol, he brings nothing. If you really thought that a legal change changes the status of the punishment, so then fine, go by the time of the awareness and let him bring a korban as a king, which as a Kohen Mashuach, Kohen Gadol who brings a pod, or as a king who brings a sa'ir. But that's not what Rabbi Shimon said. He just says, no, well, we can't apply the commoner because he only became aware after, so he brings nothing. So therefore, even Rabbi Shimon would actually agree that a status change does not change the outcome, and he does not get the new punishment of the new person. In other words, a bogeret would not get chenek. And so therefore, we reject Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak to say that this is a machloket between Tanaim. And instead, we offer a third answer. Hamale Rabbi Yochanan letana. Rabbi Yochanan told the Tana here meaning the professional reciter, who was reciting that first baraita of Shelah. When he said it in front of Rabbi Yochanan says, oh, you better correct your language. Tane tidon biskila. So here, when the Tana quoted the baraita as we have it, Nara gets sikila. Bogeret is chenek. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, change the word. You heard it wrong. And Bogeret also gets sikila. And by doing that, you see that the two baraitot actually agree 100% that the change in status, in fact, does not change the outcome. It remains sikila. Okay, now ve'amai. Okay, fine. We'll accept your change, Rabbi Yochanan, but still, you have to explain the reason for your change. How do you fit it with the pasuk? Pasuk says only a na'ara me'orasa gets stoned, but now she's not a na'ara me'orasa. Amar Rabbi Il'a, Amar Kera han-na'ara shehayeta kebar. Since the pasuk adds extra yedi'ah, the na'ara. What do you mean the na'ara? The one who had been a na'ara. Nevertheless gets sekila. So here the word hana'ara actually appears in both contexts. Hana'ara in the na'ara me'orasa case appears twice. Na'aki na'ara. No, that's just na'ara. Here is hana'ara. And it also appears up here v'hotziu et hana'ara regarding the mosi shem ra. Okay, so no matter which one, it's going to apply to even someone who is a bogeret. All right, so now Amar Rabbi Il'a, Amar le Rabbi Chananya le Rabbi Il'a. So Rabbi Il'a said, we learn from Hanara, even someone who is now bogeret, as long as she had been a na'ara, she gets sekila. But Rabbi Chananya tells him, "Ihachi milkana me'lilki ume'asela nami lishlem." If so, hana'ara comes to include even someone who used to be a na'ara. We apply the law of Mosi Shemra. Then why don't you apply it also to the man? Right? We saw above that in this case the man does not have to, if she's a bogeret. In the meantime, and so now the consummation of the marriage happens as a bogeret, and he falsely accuses her because she's a bogeret. He does not get lashes and does not have to pay a fine. But if you're now saying hanara includes someone who became a bogeret, who gets sekila, so then he should also get his punishments. So Rabbi Il'a said to him, "May the merciful one save us from your opinion." Right? You're totally wrong. I can't even tell you what's wrong with you. Right? God save us from your opinion. There's a blog like that. Rabbi Chanina said the opposite. May God save us from your opinion. You have nothing to base yourself on. All right. So now they resorted to attacking each other in this way, but we want to know, okay, what actually is the answer? Why would you make a distinction between her punishment and his punishment? Let's focus on exactly what the sin is that each of them did and when it happened. For her, it's her action that she, if she did, in fact, commit adultery, it's her action that caused her to be punished. It's his bending of his lips, meaning making a false accusation, that causes him to deserve a punishment. Now, her action when she was led astray, committed adultery, she was a na'ara at the time of adultery. Therefore, she will be punished as a na'ara, sikila. Ze akimat sefatav garmu lo emat kamechayev ahi sha'ata bogeret havai. Whereas the false accusation of his crooked lips, when did that sin happen? That sin happened after the marriage, which was after she became, if it was after she became a bogeret, then, so his sin happened when she's a bogeret, not a na'ara. And therefore, he is punished according to the law that would be had she been, she is a bogeret. So really, the difference in punishment is a consequence of the time difference between her sin and his sin. I mean, only one of them sinned, but in a case where she sinned, she would get sikila, because the adultery happened during na'ara. Whereas if he's the one that sins, falsely accuses her, he does not get a punishment because that happened as a bogeret. He would get punished if she's still a na'ara. All right, good. Now, we resolved, we have three ways of resolving that, and now we see another braita. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we want to know where the different types of stoning happened. So if it's a nara me'orasa and she committed adultery as a nara, and now she's accused after the marriage, this is the Mosi Shemra case, and she gets stoned at the entrance of her father's house. But if she doesn't have a father's entrance of a father's house, she has no father or he has no house, then it doesn't mean you get away with sikila altogether, but instead you go to the city gate. But if it's mostly a non-Jewish city, then you can't call the city gate she'arecha, your city gate, because it's mostly not yours. So then in that case, you go to the entrance of the courthouse. The courthouse is kind of like the local establishment of the Jewish authority. And so that's the public place. So it's the equivalent of the entranceway to a Jewish city. That's the main thoroughfare. That's also where the elders would sit at the gate entrance. So that is equivalent, if you don't have that, to the entrance of the Bet Din. Another punishment that's similar, that also gets sikila, also at the gate, is someone who commits idolatry. So we stone him at the gate of the city where he sinned, right? The city where he committed worshipped idolatry. That's where he gets punished. But similarly there, if it's a city that's mostly non-Jews, then we go to the entrance of the Bet Din instead. All right, what is the source for this law? How do we know that he goes to the gate of the Bet Din if it's a city that's all non-Jews? So we learn it from this following baraita. So baraita says you go to your gates. That's the gate where you actually committed the sin. Wait, how do you know that it should be the gate of the city where he committed idolatry? Maybe it should be the gate of the city where he is judged. It says the word sha'arecha twice in the paragraph, which I'll show you in a second. It says it below regarding the sentencing, and says it above regarding the sinning of idolatry, just like it said above as talking about where he committed the sin, so too the sha'arecha said below would be the same gate where he worshipped the idols. It's in that city. So we're talking about these pesukim here. and Devarim 17, if you find someone ba'achad she'arecha in any of your settlements, which sounds like it's talking about in Israel, where most of the settlements are going to be Jewish settlements that Hashem is giving you, and you find someone who did something terrible, and he went and worshipped idolatry, bowed down to the sun, the moon, so on, and you hear about it and you check it out, and it turns out to be true. So this is the second sharecha, where the punishment happens. So since it says the word sharecha twice, it must be talking about the same place. Therefore, if possible, you have to do it in the city of the sin, and not the city where the judgment happens. That's one thing we learn from it. Davar acher, or another alternative explanation, is sharecha velo share goyim. Yes, you stone him in your city gates, in Israelite cities, but not in non-Jewish cities. So there you go. This is the derivation. It has to be your city, not a non-Jewish city. So if it is a non-Jewish city, then you kind of revert back to the possibility of the Bet Din, which is the representative of the Jewish authority within the city. Now, Hai Sharecha Ha'apikter. Now we have a question. How could you learn two different things from one baraita? The truth is that in Tanaitic sources, they do often learn two things, even two halachot, from one source, from one pasuk. But Talmud Bavli has a different methodology and says, no, a one-to-one relationship between every pasuk and every law that we learn from them. So we already learned one thing from the She'arecha, that is the city where you committed the idolatry and not the sentencing. So how could you learn another thing that has to be a Jewish city? If so, only learn one thing. Could have said sha'ar in the singular, but she'arecha is in plural, so actually we can learn two halachot from one word. Ashkechan avodah zarah. Good. Now we know that that's true for avodah zarah. Nadam orasa minalan. How do you know regarding the stoning of nadam orasa, which was also done at your city gates? How do you know that if it's a non-Jewish city, that also you would do it at the entrance of Bet Din? Amar Rabbi Abhu, Gamar Petach, mi Petach, upetach mi Sha'ar, ve'Sha'ar mi She'arecha. Because we'll learn the word Petach that talks about, that's Petach regarding the Mosi Shemra. That's in front of the gate of the entrance to the father's house. So that's Petach. And we're going to learn the word Petach from another place where it says Petach regarding the Mishkan, where it says in Devarim, here's the pasuk, Petach Sha'ar He-Chaser. So you said the word Petach and Sha'ar back to back, so therefore you know that those are equivalent, and from using that as a bridge, V'Sha'ar mi Sha'arecha, we can learn the word Sha'ar from She'arecha, that's used in that word in the context of idolatry. Therefore, just like regarding idolatry, if it's a non-Jewish city, then you're going to have to go to the court. So too regarding Mosi Shemra, if it's a non-Jewish city, then you'll end up having to go to the entrance of the courthouse. All right, last baraita. Tenu Rabbanan. Mosi Shemra loke v'noten me'a se'ela. Rabbi Yehuda omer lilkot loke mikol makom me'a se'ela Baal noten lo Baal eno noten. So the Tanakh Kama gives us a standard law. Mosi Shemra, his punishment is lashes, and he has to give 100 se'ela. And this would be true no matter what, whether the man consummated the marriage or whether he did not. If he makes this false accusation after the chuppah, after the marriage ceremony, he gets his punishment even if they did not have bi'ah. Rabbi Yehuda says no. The lashes he gets no matter what. He gets the lashes just for accusing her, but the 100 selah payment he only pays if the husband consummated, had bi'ah with her, then he pays. But if he never consummated, then not. The idea is like the other cases of the rapist and seducer. They're paying 50 shekel. That's because they caused her to lose her betulim, so they got to pay this fine. So this guy also, if he falsely accused her, but he never slept with her, so he didn't cause her to lose her betulim, so he shouldn't have to pay the fine. The malkut, though, the lashes, is he did something dangerous. If they believed him, they would have taken her out to be stoned. So he still deserves the sikila according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now, this machloket about whether it matters whether the husband had bi'ah or not is equivalent to a machloket that we're going to see on the next daf. Where now we're just assuming that you know it already, but it's the same idea. Kami palge plukta Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Rabbanan v'achi kamad hamosi shem ra lokev noten me'ah sela ben Baal ben shelo Baal ke Rabbanan. Rabbanan, that's exactly what they say in the Braita, says that you get both punishments, the lashes and the 100 sela. Whether the man consummated or did not consummate the marriage, he still gets it if he is Mosi Shemra and he's lying. Rabbi Yehuda omer lilkot loker mikol makom me'asela Baal noten lo Baal eno noten. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Eliezer ben Yaakov over there it says, and that Baraita is going to say that the law of Mosi Shemra only applies if there was bi'ah. So the Yehuda is can follow Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and say, well, that's true for the monetary payment only if there's bi'ah, not if there's no bi'ah. But regarding the malkut, that's his interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That happens no matter what. He deserves malkut. Okay, all this is one way to match up this baraita and the baraita of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. But there's another way. Actually, you could explain both opinions of this baraita are within Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who says that the law applies only if there was bi'ah. According to this, the Tanakama here, are not saying that, are not like Rabbanan, that say you get these both punishments no matter what, whether you had bi'ah or not. They're actually saying the opposite. They're saying they're being the most lenient and saying that you get both punishments only if there was bi'ah. No, right, only if there was bi'ah, not no matter what, only bi'ah. So that would be one interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Yehuda omer litkot lokeh mikol makom. Rabbi Yehuda says, I also agree with Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that it does matter whether you had bi'ah or not, but that makes a difference only regarding the fine. But regarding the lashes, you get it no matter what. So here, this is a either more lenient or less lenient interpretation within Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Okay, so two completely different ways of understanding the Rabbanan of that first baraita. Now, question within Rabbi Yehuda. Does Rabbi Yehuda really think that you're going to get lashes no matter what, whether there was bi'ah or not? If the husband has bi'ah with his new bride, then and he falsely accuses her, then he does get lashes. But if they did not consummate, he does not get lashes. So that means he should be like the totally more lenient opinion that you don't get anything if there was no bi'ah. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, lokeh makat madu ben Rabbanan. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, you're right. Really, in essence, Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the Rabbanan in this interpretation that says if there's no bi'ah, there's no law of Mosi Shemra at all for him. He doesn't get lashes, and he does not have to pay. Rather, when Rabbi Yehuda says that he gets lashes, that's only the Rabbanan for being rebellious. Anytime someone does something that's rebellious against the court, no good, so the rabbis have the right to say, here, you deserve malkut. So he defamed his wife. This is not the official Doraita law of Basi Shemra, but the rabbi said, you deserve it. That's what Rabbi Yehuda meant. And so that's why it makes sense to distinguish why, really, on a Doraita level, none of the laws apply. Okay, another similar way of interpreting Rabbi Yehuda is that he's not talking about malkut Rabbanan, but rather payment. Rav Papa Omer, my Baal lokeh tekatani hatam mamon. And that Baraita says if he had bi'ah, he gets lashes. It didn't mean literally lashes. It means he has to pay. Now, does lashes mean payment? Would you call payment lashes? In Behatenan, yes, we do. And here's a Mishnah that in fact does use that, or Baraita that in fact uses that language. Hasi erki alai. Someone says, I want to pay half of my valuation. He's saying, I'm going to donate to the Bet HaMikdash. Half of, he can say my entire valuation, or he can say he wants to give only half. Noten hasi erko. he gives only half. That's the first opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says no. For doing that, he gets malkut and he has to give his full amount. Now, why? Amai. What do you mean? Why should he get lashes? No, he doesn't mean literally you get lashes and you also pay. He means you get lashes, means you get a punishment of having to pay full. Even though you only donated half of your value, you nevertheless have to pay the full value. So here's a case where when you say lashes, it doesn't mean literally lashes. It just means getting a severe penalty. But actually, it's paid by money. Now, final point, why would you have to pay for your entire worth if you only donated half of your worth? Because we make a gezerah. Although technically, if you give half of your valuation, that is valid. But someone might come and make a mistake and say, I want to give a full valuation of half of myself. And that's different than a half of a valuation. Because if I evaluate my entire being, fine, I'll pay half. But to evaluate half of myself, well then, which half are you talking about? Which half? Is it if it's the top half, well then my life depends on my top half, right? So, or is it the half of just limbs that my life does not depend on? And so since you don't specify which, so saying I'm donating a valuation of half of myself, and that half might include essential organs, and so if I would donate them, then I would not be alive anymore. Therefore, he has to pay for his entire worth. And so that's the reason why someone who donates half of his worth still has to pay his entire worth because of that gezerah. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.